Invertebrate Paleontology at the Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm here to answer your questions today about what it's like to be a paleontologist or a curator, or any questions you may have about fossils in general. I'm really excited to be here, and it's going to be a great time. I want to start out by talking a little bit about what I do for a living. I am a paleontologist. I focus on invertebrate animals, that is, animals without backbones. And my particular research area happens to be trilobites, which are quite abundant here in the Cincinnati region. As a curator, I'm responsible for one of the largest late Ordovician fossil collections in the world. I also do independent scientific research. I am editor-in-chief of the Journal of Paleontology, so I work with my community to publish scientific results from around the world. I'm also really excited to work with the public. I'm very involved in public science education. I'm also very involved in exhibit and education program development, and anything really to do with science on the museum or in the museum. I usually am involved somehow. We've had some questions from the community that I can start our conversation off with. And the first one is a really big one. It's a doozy, and it's, what can fossils tell us about the past, the present, and the future? And really, I have a colleague that says paleontology is everything. And this really is the truth. Fossils form the basis of our geologic timescale, and in conjunction with other techniques like isotopic radiometric dating, we use fossils to give us a relative chronology of the events in Earth's history. Basically, they are the foundation of how we understand time and sequences in the geologic record. And because the Earth has run pretty much almost every experiment that it can run, with the exception of humans today, in the past. And many of these experiments are long-term experiments, things that we think of that happen over the course of hundreds of thousands to millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of years. We can use fossils to help us understand the events and how they unfold over longer time periods. Things like evolution and extinction, changes in biodiversity, environmental and climate change, plate tectonics and configuration of past oceans and continents, evolutionary relationships, even life on other planets like Mars. The Earth's fossil record helps us to understand how these events work and how they unfold and what the implications are of these events. And that helps us to understand our present and what's happening in our Earth now, and also helps us to make predictive models of what things might look like in the future. So paleontology really is the study of the past, but it's the study of the past to understand the present and to help us to understand the future. In that way, fossils are immediately relevant to modern questions that we have today. Modern questions of and challenges related to biodiversity and, the sixth greatest mass extinction, which biologists say we are currently in, changes in climate and what that means for species on our planet, how they will respond, what extinction looks like and extinction processes, how those processes unfold, which species go extinct, maybe why they go extinct, which ones survive and why. These can help us make predictive models about our current biodiversity crisis. Even like I said, being an exopaleontologist is using Earth's fossil record to help us understand where we might look for life on other planets. So really, fossils and paleontology is everything, and it really helps us understand events in the past, helps us to know how things are unfolding today, and helps us to make predictive models in the future. We have a question: what made you fall in love with trilobites? I actually accidentally fell into trilobite research. I had started out wanting to be a dinosaur paleontologist. I think like a lot of kids, I grew up loving dinosaurs. That was my first venture into paleontology. I grew up in Alberta, Canada, and That's basically Canadian dinosaur country. And so I would go out in the field with friends and go and hunt, for lack of a better word, dinosaurs. And I went into college with the purpose of actually becoming a vertebrate paleontologist. And through a sequence of events in my life that happened, I ended up not being able to pursue vertebrate paleontology and sort of fell into invertebrate paleontology, doing my master's degree with a researcher who worked on trilobites. And for the first few months of my master's degree, I really didn't like it. It was a little bit different. You might not think it's that different, vertebrate versus invertebrate paleontology, but they actually are quite different to us paleontologists. And I really thought, I'm making a mistake. I need to reevaluate. And then once I got to learn more and more about trilobites and how important they were in the fossil record and the kinds of stories that they could tell us and the kinds of scientific investigations you could do, I came to realize that they're like a really cool animal, and they help us to understand a lot about the Paleozoic time period. That is from over 500 million years ago to 250 million years ago, and that deep history is greatly informed by trilobites and the research that's done on them. And so I just thought they were super cool. Trilobites are one of the most diverse groups and longest living groups that we have in the fossil record. They also are the first fully sighted organisms in the fossil record, which is very exciting if you want to study the evolution of sight and eyes in the fossil record. And they do a lot of really amazing things in terms of their evolutionary adaptations. So they just have a lot of fantastic stories to tell. So in Cincinnati, if you're from this region or another fossil-rich area, you may know that you can, in Cincinnati, go out into your backyard or your local creek, maybe a couple of nature parks, and see that we have abundant rocks and fossils in the area. This is because our rocks are well exposed, thanks to some wonderful plate tectonic events and some fantastic erosion. And that makes them very accessible to scientists and researchers and also to the public. And that's one of the things I love about our rocks in this area in the Cincinnatian series, is that everybody can pretty much access them. And so I want to tell you just a little bit about what it is that you're actually viewing when you go out fossil hunting. When you hit a section, whether it's in a creek bed or say at the Trammell Fossil Park up in Sharonville, that's Trammel if you want to go check it out. It's a fantastic place. What you're actually looking at is an ancient ocean. And that ocean covered most of the United States 450 million years ago. And so when you're actually digging in those rocks, you're dredging an ancient ocean that is full of marine life. And the fact that it's almost 500 million years old, and that those creatures were living and swimming and burrowing and skittering across the seafloor right here is actually a really fantastic part of our geological and scientific heritage in this region. Hi Tom, you wrote, I've read the Camarasaurus cephalopod could be either 15 or up to 30 feet. Do you know what their maximum size probably was? In truth, I don't know what their maximum size was, but there have been studies on pieces that when you do the biometrics and you take a chunk and you try to figure out what this whole size of the animal was, of up to 20 feet in length. That's the number that I am most familiar with. So they could be huge. I like to think of them as sort of large telephone poles swimming through the ocean. So when you do go out fossil hunting, whether you're in Cincinnati or not, there's just a couple of things I think that you should be aware of. It'd be important to make sure you have all the right equipment. The great thing about going fossil collecting is that it's a very enriching experience, but it's not expensive. I always like to say that all I really need is a camera and my rock hammer and a backpack, and I'm ready to go. And that's pretty much true. Of course, there's a few other things you might want, like really great hiking boots or shoes, closed-toed shoes that have support. You'll want to take your backpack. You'll want to take maybe a rock hammer of some sort. You'll want to take a sunscreen and a good hat and maybe some shades. I always like to wear long-sleeved shirts and long pants, and that may seem a little counterintuitive here in the hot summers, hot humid summers, but actually long sleeves and long pants protect you from bug bites, they protect you from sunburn, and they protect you from cuts and scrapes as you're walking along the outcrop. Bring some baggies or something that allows you to put your specimens in, a box or baggies, and associated paper that you can write locality information down on. The most important thing that you can do for science when you're fossil collecting is to write the location of the fossil that you got. And if you can get a GPS off your phone, that's even better. And the reason is because paleontologists and geologists can reconstruct the geology and the setting and the formations and even identify the fossils for you once we know where the location is. So if you don't know that information, it's totally fine. You don't need to know it necessarily. We can reconstruct it and tell you about it. But we only can do that if we have locality information. And scientists can only use your collections in museums if there is locality information with it. Because we can't reconstruct that information, the fossils become useless for science. And so when you go out collecting, please make sure that when you're in the field, not when you get home, when you're in the field, you have a way to record in a notebook or on slips of paper that you put with the specimen exactly where you got it from. Believe you me, there's been times where I picked up fossils and said, I'll remember that later. And by the time I get home with the kids and everybody's shuffling in and dinner gets going, and then all of a sudden you realize you didn't do it, and then it's the next day, then you forget where you got it from. And so when you're in the field, that's a very good practice. Also make sure when you're collecting, and in Cincinnati, we're pretty good here, that you don't collect on someone's private property, right? So creek beds, when done safely, are a great place. There's also some places like Caesars Creek State Park that allow surface collecting. Brookville Lake Dam allows surface collecting. Like I said before, Trammell Fossil Park, Trammel, you can Google that. That is a great place to go, and you can collect there and take home whatever you find. There's also a lot of nature centers and city and county parks that have programming associated with fossils, and so you'll want to check with them and see. Everyone has rules and regulations that you have to follow when you are doing responsible fossil collecting. As you know, there's a lot of road cuts out in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Generally speaking, it's okay to collect there if done safely. You can collect as many fossils as you want for educational purposes, as long as you're not selling them and making a business out of it. And you just want to be extra careful on those outcrops. For a lot of reasons, they're dangerous. Rocks might fall into the traffic. It's not great to have, kids climbing high, a lot of loose rock. It's not the best place to take young ones. But if you do go out there, and we see people out there, just be extra safe. Try to stay low and be responsible. And keep in mind that not every state likes to have people on their road cuts, so you may get asked to leave. It has happened. So, thank you, Erin, for your suggestion of selling fossil digging kits. I think that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, and Caitlin, I do happen to have a couple of fossils I can show you. Let me show you one of my favorites. Because I'm at home, I don't have like my massive collection with me. You can probably understand. Hope everybody can see this. The lighting is a little strange, and I'm getting used to the camera. There we go. He's in my face. This is a trilobite known as Flexicalamin meekai. Comes from the Cincinnati area. There he is, all nicely rolled up. This is a 450 million year old trilobite. So trilobites are ancient arthropods. We don't have anything like them today. They went extinct 250 million years ago, and the world's largest mass extinction event, the end Permo-Triassic extinction event, which wiped out 96% of all species. The closest living relative we have to trilobites are horseshoe crabs and scorpions. But as trilobites left no descendants behind, that is nothing, they didn't evolve into anything else, as a class of arthropods, they're completely gone. Now this trilobite is rolling up. You can kind of see how its head right here is tucked under with its tail right there, and its thorax with all these segments is basically rolled it up. And this is a response to either predation, because they would have soft gills underneath here that they'd want to protect. Every segment would have a leg and a gill structure for breathing, and they want to protect them, so they'd roll them up. That would be the softer, gooier parts for predators to get. Also, it's probably a response to environmental changes, like inundation by submarine mud flows, which would have buried them at the bottom of the ocean, and they would have wanted to roll up to protect their gills from inundation and suffocation. And unfortunately, of course, this guy did not make it as a result of that. But you can see that this enrolling behavior is very similar to modern day pill bugs or roly-polies. So they're often confused or thought to be related to roly-polies, and they're not directly related at all, actually. It's just a similar behavior. Right, so Tom asks, because the shells are calcium carbonate and limestone is calcium carbonate, how does the fossilization process work for ore-deficient fossils? Well, actually, in most cases, not all cases for the Cincinnatian, the fossils are actually their original shell material. So what really happens is just kind of a form of permineralization, if you will, where any pore spaces are just filled with minerals, calcium carbonate specifically. But in this case, their shell is actually calcium carbonate. So you're seeing the real deal here, which is really cool. In some cases, shells in the Cincinnatian, particularly in the case of clams and snails, most of their shells are aragonitic. That is that they have a magnesium carbonate base as opposed to a calcium carbonate base, which dissolves much more quickly at the bottom of the ocean during preservation. So when you see them, they're molds. That is, the shell's been dissolved out. What are the bumps? Tom asks, what are the bumps on the Flexi 4? So some of them, like in Flexicalamine granulosa, are in some cases ornamentation. That is, it's just ways for species-specific characteristics. Some of the bumps, particularly in arthropod shells, tend to be where little hairs come out. These would have been sensory hairs that the animal would have used to sense its environment. In some cases, some of the bumps, particularly on the underside, can be used as a locking structure in a way to provide more surface area and also grip on the undersurface as the trilobite's either rolling or moving through the substrate. Very good question. You can see on this other trilobite that I have, Phacops, let's see if there we go, that they have a lot of bumps on the glabella area of the head. Let's see if we can get it close up. And do you see those beautiful eye lenses there? See if it'll, we're working the camera, let's see if it'll work. There we go. Individual, this is actually a Devonian age trilobite. It doesn't come from Cincinnati, it actually comes from northwestern Ohio. So this is a trilobite that's quite a bit younger. This is Phacops. See how beautifully preserved. He's cracked right out of the rock, just like this. And they have these beautiful lenses on their eyes called schizochrol eyes, schizochrol lenses. And they're very similar. They're a compound eye that's very similar to what you see in flies or dragonflies. So they had very sophisticated, for a 350 million year old animal, a very sophisticated visual system as well. So pretty cool. if you could reconstruct these animals, you would see that they would have a couple of antennae that would come off of the top. Some of them have had cerci come out of the bottom, these little like sensory projections. We don't know that's the case in these guys. Each segment would have had a biramus appendage. So they would have had an upper gill at each segment here for breathing and a lower walking leg. So if you were to flip this guy over, he kind of would have been like a little roly-poly bug with gills attached, although the legs would have been very similar. Very cool. And I also brought along, just from being in the field the other day, just a piece of Cincinnatian limestone for you guys to see. You know, we're pretty lucky here in Cincinnati. I mean, people come from all over the world to look at our rocks and study them. And what's fascinating is that for people who live here and grew up here, you know, they tend to think it's normal that you can go in your backyard or your creek or your rock wall around your house and see these amazing fossils, and that everybody has that. But I can tell you, I've been kind of a lot of places in the world, and there is no place I've been that has as many and such a density and diversity of fossils as the Cincinnatian series, the rocks that we have in this area. So you can see just from this one piece that I have all kinds of amazing creatures in here in this limestone. Now they're broken up because limestones form by accumulation of shells at the bottom of the ocean through wave action. So they're really broken up, but I have pieces of trilobite in here, I have crinoids, I have bryozoans, I have brachiopods. And what's really fun is to take one of these pieces home with your family and look at them under the microscope, because you can see the animals and the textures. You can see fine details in the morphology or the shape of the animals. And of course you can see, we tend to see, like in the field, you know, the big dudes, right? But what's really fascinating is there's a whole microfauna, a whole fauna of very small animals that you don't see really well with the naked eye, that you might find in these pieces, and if you didn't look, you wouldn't know, right? And although this piece is kind of dirty because I haven't really washed it, you can see on the side here that this is just chock full. It's made up completely of fossil debris, and that's what our limestones are made up of. Little bits of mud at the bottom of the ocean and shells. So our limestones are made up of the calcium carbonate shells of animals. So in essence, they're exactly the same material. Thomas asked if we have any guesses on what colors trilobites could have been. Unfortunately, we don't. We know that arthropods can get very beautiful in color, and that certainly the brown color itself might not actually be the original color of the fossils. This one's a bit darker and almost sometimes they become almost black. And so we know that arthropods that have sophisticated visual systems can be quite colorful. With trilobites, their visual systems, while sophisticated for the time, probably were not image forming, in the sense that they weren't going to actually see like a single image like the way that you and I kind of see, or even just like a clear image times 1,000, depending on how many lenses they had. So we think that they probably would have, you know, been more like seeing shadows, changes in light, maybe blurry objects moving in front of them. And because they're not super sophisticated in their sight, color might not have been something that they would have been able to see, and therefore color might not have been something that they would have invested in as an evolutionary adaptation. So having said all of that, the best answer is we have no idea. And that's why I like to think that they could be any kind of color. And I encourage kids to color them as they see fit. All right. Just take a drink here. So when we're kind of all sort of thinking about what are the kinds of things we can do with our families, when we're all sort of a little bit stuck in here, certainly going out in the field is a great way to do that. Katie asks, what would the water they lived in have been like, and was it shallow? Yes, so the ocean that these animals lived in was actually quite shallow. It's called an epicontinental sea, meaning that if you think about our continent, the ocean simply would have come up. The sea level would have been high enough to come up and cover the continent. And so it's not like we're talking about a deep ocean basin that they would have lived in. It was very shallow, anywhere at its deepest parts from about 100 to 150 feet in water depth. Light would have been able to penetrate probably to the bottom, although it wouldn't have been, super light at the bottom, of course. And it would have been very warm. At that time, North America, as we know it, was not North America. It was a proto-North American continent called Laurentia, and Cincinnati was actually 20 degrees south of the equator. So we were actually in the tropic zone in the southern hemisphere. And it would be a place that you'd want to go on vacation. Maybe we'll all head down there after this and go, very warm, tropical snorkeling, scuba diving, and pretty well lit. But we don't have any modern analogs of that really today. There isn't much in the way of epicontinental seas that we can point to on Earth. This would have been at a time when sea level was really, really high. But they would have been fully marine, and in the case of our trilobites, certainly would have been scurrying along the ocean bottom. So Jen asks if I have horn corals. I'm afraid I don't have horn corals with me right now. But I can tell you that if you want to go get horn corals and see them, they actually start to appear in the Richmondian of the Cincinnatian. So you're going to want to start looking in the Waynesville Formation, and one really great place to go get them is sort of further north of the city in Route 1, Indiana. Route 1 in Indiana off of the I-74 near, oh gosh, what's the town? I'll have to see if I can remember it before the end of this. Route 1, if you just go off I-74 and take Route 1 in Indiana, it's really just about 10 minutes on the other side of the Ohio-Indiana border. And just keep driving, you'll eventually go down a large hill with a big cut, and you can't miss it. And if you go sort of to the middle section of that area, that's when the horn corals start appearing. You'll want to definitely do that to catch your horn corals. Tom Hughes, yes, did climate contribute to sea level rise and drop? Yes, absolutely. So the Ordovician was one of the warmer times in Earth's history, and during sort of the late Ordovician, the time we're going to talk about, there were no glaciers anywhere on Earth. And so all that water that is normally locked up in a glacier was basically in the basins and flooding the continents. Now, towards the end of the Ordovician, glaciation actually started, and as a result of that, we see a glacier starting to grow on the southern hemisphere and on Gondwana at that time, which is a major megacontinent that was covering the South Pole. And as it grew, it pulled water out of the sea and off of the land. And so at the end of the Ordovician, we see a major sea level drop, such that we don't have any record of that on our continent because the water has disappeared and now the continent is eroding. And so what you end up getting is a gap in the record between the close to the end of the Ordovician when sea level was high to when the glaciers grew and pulled that water off of the continents. As a result of that, we had the second largest mass extinction event in Earth's history, the end Ordovician mass extinction event, which was a 2-pulse extinction event that wiped out about 85% of all marine life on Earth. And that was related to climate change and subsequent sea level drops as glaciers grew and expanded and then melted again. A very interesting time, that's for sure. It's really cool to study the Cincinnatian because it gives us a good idea of what a fauna looks like before essentially it kind of becomes decimated in a very large mass extinction event. And we can use those pieces of information to help us understand our current extinction biodiversity crisis, and also, although it's kind of the opposite problem that we're having, also understand how animals respond, particularly in this case marine animals respond to changes in sea level and climate and temperatures and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting. All right. Okay, we're nearing the end of our time together. Does anybody have any further questions? I really appreciate all of the questions that everybody has asked. It's been a fantastic conversation. While our museum is closed, we are looking for support to help us. So please check out our website, www.cincymuseum.org, to see how you can contribute, either through renewing your membership and supporting us, or perhaps providing us with a donation as we navigate this time. I certainly appreciate all of your interest, and I'm hoping that we will be able to have more conversations here in the future. Everybody take care and stay healthy. Thank you.